In 1893, 9 justices of the United States Supreme Court were asked to decide whether a tomato was a fruit or a vegetable. They knew the botanically correct answer. They ruled the other way anyway, unanimously. That ruling stood. It still stands. And it quietly shaped the way a nation eats, not because the science changed, but because the words did. This is the story of the most litigated piece of produce in American history, and what it can actually do for your body when you stop calling it the wrong thing. Botanically, there is no debate. A tomato is a fruit. Specifically, it is a berry, a fleshy structure grown from the ovary of a flowering plant containing seeds. By that definition, tomatoes share their category with bananas, grapes, and avocados. Strawberries, surprisingly, are not berries. The tomato has been a fruit since before humans named it. The Aztec word tomatal referred to the swelling structure growing on a vine, a seed-bearing growth, the botanical definition fulfilled without the word. Europe received the tomato in the 1500s, renamed it variations of pomodoro, golden apple, and for 200 years largely refused to eat it. By the 1800s, that had changed. By 1893, it had changed enough to require a legal ruling. The Tariff Act of 1883 applied a 10% duty to imported vegetables. Imported fruits entered duty-free. John Nix ran one of the largest produce importation businesses in New York. He imported tomatoes from the West Indies. His customs collector, Edward Hedden, classified those tomatoes as vegetables and levied the 10% tariff. Nix paid it, and then he sued to get it back. His argument was precise. A tomato is a fruit by scientific definition. The Tariff Act should not apply. Hedden's counter-argument was equally precise. In the common language of trade, in the kitchen, on the dinner table, a tomato is a vegetable. And trade law is written for commerce, not botany. The case reached the Supreme Court. Nix v. Hedden, 1893. The court heard testimony about the common usage of the word vegetable. They heard from grocers, from cooks, from importers. They consulted dictionaries. They read the definitions of fruit and vegetable from standard references of the time. They acknowledged explicitly in their ruling that a tomato is botanically the fruit of the tomato vine. They acknowledged the scientific classification was not in dispute. And then they ruled against Nix. Justice Horace Gray wrote the unanimous opinion. Tomatoes, he held, are vegetables in the common meaning of the word, grown in kitchen gardens, served at dinner alongside meat and potatoes, not eaten as dessert. The law speaks the language of ordinary commerce. In ordinary commerce, the tomato is a vegetable. That ruling created a legal category that has outlasted every administration since. The United States Department of Agriculture classifies the tomato as a vegetable. School lunch programs count it as a vegetable. The most infamous application of this logic came in 1981, when the Reagan administration proposed counting ketchup as a vegetable serving in school lunches, a proposal that was withdrawn after public outcry, but that rested on the same legal foundation Nix versus Hedden built. The word shaped the policy. The policy shaped the plate. This is not a trivial distinction. What we call a food determines where it appears in dietary guidelines, how much of it we eat, and how we prepare it. Most people eat tomatoes as a condiment, ketchup, pasta sauce, a slice on a sandwich. Few eat them the way they eat fruit, whole, unadorned in quantity. That matters because the tomato is not nutritionally equivalent to most vegetables. And what it actually contains, what it can do inside a human body, is substantially different from what most people assume. Simply has been holding a tomato since the beginning of this episode. He checks the label. It says vegetable. He checks his botany book. It says fruit. He looks at the camera. He looks at the tomato. He shrugs and takes a bite. The tomato does not care what the Supreme Court called it. What it contains operates by different rules entirely. The tomato's most studied compound is lycopene, a carotenoid, the pigment that makes ripe tomatoes red. It is one of the most powerful antioxidants found in common food. Lycopene neutralizes free radicals, reactive molecules that damage cells, accelerate aging, and contribute to the development of certain cancers. The human body does not produce lycopene. It must be consumed. The tomato is the single largest source of dietary lycopene for most people in the Western world. One medium tomato contains 4 to 6 milligrams. A half cup of cooked tomato sauce contains 10 to 15, 2 to 3 times more from the same raw material. Here is the counterintuitive part. Cooking tomatoes increases their lycopene content. Not marginally, substantially. Heat breaks down the cell walls that trap lycopene, releasing it into a form the body can absorb. The bioavailability of lycopene from raw tomatoes is significantly lower than from cooked or processed tomatoes. Canned tomatoes, tomato paste, sun-dried tomatoes, these are not nutritional compromises. In terms of lycopene specifically, they are upgrades. The tomato is one of the very few foods that becomes more nutritious when processed. The intuition that fresh and raw is always superior does not hold here. The research on lycopene and human health has been building for 30 years. A landmark Harvard study following nearly 50,000 men found that high lycopene intake, primarily from tomato-based foods, was associated with a significantly reduced risk of prostate cancer. Subsequent studies have examined lycopene's relationship with cardiovascular disease, finding associations with reduced LDL oxidation and lower rates of heart attack. These are observational studies. The mechanisms are plausible but not fully established. What is established? Lycopene is real, it is concentrated in tomatoes, and most people are substantially under-consuming it. Simply sets down his botany book and picks up a different document, a laminated card, the Tomato Protocol. We built a free companion guide for this episode, the 5 highest lycopene tomato preparations, how to pair them with fat for maximum absorption, and a 1-week template for hitting meaningful lycopene targets without changing much about how you already eat. Link in the description. No email required. Let's keep going. Lycopene is fat-soluble. That means it requires dietary fat to be absorbed. Eating a raw tomato without fat, in a salad with no dressing, on a sandwich with no oil, delivers some lycopene. Eating the same tomato cooked with olive oil delivers dramatically more. The Mediterranean practice of slow-cooking tomatoes in olive oil is not just tradition. It is inadvertently optimized delivery. The simple formula, tomatoes plus heat plus fat. Every variation of that combination, shakshuka, marinara, roasted tomatoes with olive oil, is performing the same function. Fresh tomatoes are superior in texture, flavor at peak ripeness, and vitamin C content, which degrades with heat. Canned tomatoes are superior in lycopene, consistency, and availability year-round. They are picked at peak ripeness and processed within hours, which preserves their nutritional profile more reliably than a tomato that traveled 1,000 miles and sat in a bin for 2 weeks. The answer to which is better depends entirely on what you are optimizing for. For lycopene, processed wins. For vitamin C, fresh wins. For most cooking applications, canned is the more reliable ingredient. The simplest application of everything in this episode, 2 to 3 servings per week of cooked tomato products, pasta sauce, tomato soup, roasted tomatoes, canned tomatoes in anything, prepared with some form of fat. That is enough to place you in the high lycopene intake category from the research literature. That is enough to matter. You do not need to eat tomatoes daily. You do not need supplements. You need cooked tomatoes, some fat, and a reasonable frequency. 1 jar of tomato sauce contains approximately the lycopene of 15 raw tomatoes, cooked, concentrated, ready to be absorbed. The habit is not exotic. It is pasta night. It is a can of diced tomatoes in a soup. It is shakshuka on a Sunday. These are meals most people already know how to make. The only change is making them with intention. Knowing what the tomato is doing on the other side of digestion, knowing why the olive oil matters, knowing that the Supreme Court got the category wrong, but your body will get the chemistry right regardless. A tomato entered the highest court in America labeled a fruit. It left labeled a vegetable. The label changed everything about how a nation consumed it. The science, the lycopene, the fat solubility, the superiority of cooked over raw does not care about the label. It operates the same way it always has. Next episode, a fruit that most people eat for a few weeks each summer and dismiss as a seasonal snack. It is very small. The research behind it is not. Scientists have examined it in more than 40 clinical trials and found effects on inflammation, muscle recovery, sleep quality, and uric acid. 4 separate biological systems, one small fruit. Simply picks one up and stares at it. He seems skeptical. Episode 3. The Cherry.